take you in!
I never imagined I'd be standing in the rain at 67, clutching a duffel bag with whatever possessions I'd managed to salvage from the rubble that was once my home. The sky had cleared after the tornado, but a gentle spring drizzle had started, as if the heavens were weeping for what we'd all lost in Sulfur. My weathered hands trembled as I reached for the doorbell of my son's suburban mansion, a home I'd never felt welcome in, despite having helped pay for the down payment years ago. April in Oklahoma is a fickle time. One day, you're admiring wildflowers along your garden path. The next, you're wondering if you'll survive to see another sunset. Yesterday had started normally enough. I was grading papers from the online literature course I still taught at the community college, enjoying retirement but not quite ready to abandon teaching entirely. The weather alert had blared on my phone and television simultaneously. I'd lived in Tornado Alley my entire life. Warnings were common, but this one felt different. The meteorologist's voice carried an urgency I rarely heard. Will Taggart, my neighbor and retired meteorologist, had pounded on my door minutes later. "Toma, this one's coming straight for us," he'd said, his silver hair disheveled by the wind that had already picked up. "My radar equipment is showing rotation. We need to get to the community shelter." I hesitated only long enough to grab my late husband's pocket watch, my medication, and my purse. Everything else seemed suddenly insignificant. The roar came before we could make it to Will's truck, a sound like a dozen freight trains bearing down simultaneously, the air pressure dropping so quickly my ears popped painfully. We barely made it to my basement before the world above us was torn apart. The Sulfur Scar, as people were already calling it, had carved an 18-mile path of destruction through our community. My home of 43 years, the house where I'd raised Preston, where I'd nursed my husband Franklin through his final battle with cancer, where I'd planted every tree and shrub with my own hands, was gone. The only recognizable feature was the basement door, half buried under what used to be my kitchen. The shelter had been crowded with shell-shocked neighbors, many injured, all of us bearing the vacant stares of those who've seen their lives obliterated in minutes. Sheriff Holloway had been organizing evacuations and connecting people with emergency services. I'd spent the night there, helping Maeve Dunaway, a nurse from the local clinic, tend to minor injuries while the seriously hurt were transported to hospitals in neighboring towns. By morning, the full scope of the destruction was apparent. My house wasn't just damaged, it was erased. Insurance would eventually cover rebuilding, but that would take months. I needed somewhere to stay. My retirement savings were healthy enough, but every hotel within 50 miles was either damaged or filled with other displaced residents. I tried calling Zora first, my oldest friend, but her daughter answered. The tornado had spared their home, but brought down a massive oak that punched through the roof. They were staying with relatives in Dallas until repairs could be made. That left Preston and Larissa. My relationship with my daughter-in-law had always been strained, though I'd tried for years to bridge the gap between us. She viewed me as outdated, provincial, an embarrassment to their cultivated image. Preston, eager to please his wife, had gradually distanced himself from me. Our calls grew less frequent, holiday visits shorter, conversations increasingly superficial. Still, surely in the wake of disaster, family obligations would override personal differences. Their doorbell chimed with an elegant melody. Through the beveled glass, I could see the pristine foyer with its marble flooring and crystal chandelier. Larissa appeared, phone in hand, mid-conversation. Her expression shifted from annoyance to shock when she recognized me. The door opened just enough for her voice to carry through. "Thomasina, what are you doing here?" Her tone made me feel like an unexpected solicitor rather than family. I explained about the tornado, my destroyed home, the lack of available accommodations. As I spoke, I watched her face harden. "This is really not a good time," she said. "We're hosting a charity fundraiser this weekend. The guest room is being set up for the event planner who's flying in tomorrow." I hadn't asked for the guest room specifically. I would have been grateful for a couch, a corner, anything. But before I could offer this compromise, Preston appeared behind her. For a moment, I saw concern flash across my son's face, a glimpse of the boy I'd raised. Then he glanced at Larissa, and his expression cooled. "Mom, you should have called first," he said, as if I were imposing on their hospitality for a casual visit rather than seeking shelter after losing everything. My phone was in the living room when the roof collapsed, I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. I borrowed Sheriff Holloway's to make calls from the shelter. Larissa stepped back, pulling at Preston's arm. They whispered furiously, thinking I couldn't hear. I caught fragments. Your mother's always been dramatic, and what will people think, and we can't afford the distraction right now. I stood there in the drizzle, water seeping into my sensible shoes, dignity gradually washing away with it. I cleared my throat. I can find somewhere else if it's an inconvenience. That's when Larissa turned to me, her carefully maintained facade cracking to reveal the contempt she'd always harbored. Do you have any idea what we're dealing with here? This fundraiser could make Preston's career. We have board members from his company coming. The governor's wife confirmed yesterday. I understand, I said quietly, though I didn't. I couldn't fathom how a party could take precedence over shelter for family. No, you don't, she spat. You never have. You and your small-town thinking, your outdated values. You've always judged us, always made me feel like I wasn't good enough for your precious son. Preston didn't defend me. He stood silently, eyes downcast, the way he used to when caught misbehaving as a child. I took a step back, stunned by the vitriol in her voice. I never meant to make you feel that way, Larissa. Save it, she said, her manicured hand gripping the door. Go to a shelter. Call one of your church friends. I don't care, but we can't help you. Not now. I looked at my son, searching for any sign of the compassionate boy I'd raised. Preston? His eyes met mine briefly before sliding away. We'll send some money to help, Mom, but Larissa's right. The timing is impossible. The rain was falling harder now, soaking through my light jacket. I adjusted my grip on the duffel bag, the sum total of my remaining possessions. I see. Larissa's parting words cut deeper than the tornado's devastation. I'd rather die than have you here ruining everything we've built. Find somewhere else to lick your wounds. The door closed with a gentle click that somehow felt more final than if it had been slammed. I stood there for a moment, rain mingling with tears I refused to acknowledge, before turning away from the grand house my son shared with a woman who despised me. As I walked down the curved driveway, a car pulled up beside me. The passenger window rolled down, revealing my granddaughter Juniper's concerned face. Grandma? What are you doing here? She asked, then noticed my bag. Wait, are you leaving? Did something happen? I forced a smile. Just a brief visit, dear. Your parents are busy with the fundraiser preparations. June's driver, a teenage boy I didn't recognize, looked uncomfortable. June herself seemed suspicious of my explanation, but didn't press. Do you need a ride somewhere? Jake and I can drop you off. I glanced back at the house, half expecting Preston to come running after me with an apology, a change of heart. The door remained closed. That's very kind, but I'll be fine, I said. The weather's clearing up. It wasn't, but pride is a stubborn companion when it's all you have left. June looked uncertain, but didn't argue. As they drove toward the house, I continued down the street. No destination in mind, just the need to put distance between myself and the rejection I'd just experienced. The county had established an emergency shelter at the high school gymnasium. I'd helped there yesterday, bringing coffee to displaced families, holding the hands of shell-shocked elderly neighbors. Now I'd be one of them, accepting a cot in a corner, grateful for a roof overhead. My phone had been destroyed with my house, but I knew the way to the school. It was 3 miles from Preston's neighborhood, a walk that would once have been easy for me. Age and arthritis made it more challenging, especially in the rain with a bag to carry. Still, each step away from my son's house felt necessary, as if I were physically distancing myself from the pain of his abandonment. I'd walked perhaps half a mile when a pickup truck slowed beside me. I tensed, decades of caution making me wary of strangers, but the window rolled down to reveal Sheriff Holloway's weathered face. Mrs. Beckett? Thomasina? He looked concerned. What on earth are you doing out here in this weather? I considered manufacturing a story, but found I lacked the energy for pretense. Heading to the shelter at the high school. He frowned. I thought you were staying with your son. Change of plans, I said simply. Something in my expression must have communicated what I couldn't say aloud. The sheriff's face softened with understanding. Get in. I'll drive you. The warmth of his truck was a small mercy. I sat in silence, watching raindrops race down the passenger window, each one charting its own erratic path, much like the tornado that had so suddenly altered mine. "Terrible business, this storm," Sheriff Holloway said after a while. "Worst I've seen since the '99 outbreak." I nodded, grateful for conversation that didn't require me to explain my family situation. How many homes were lost? Still assessing, but at least 100 completely destroyed, many more damaged. Miracle we didn't lose more lives. He glanced at me. "Your place was hit hard." "Nothing left but memories," I replied, "and those the storm couldn't take." We arrived at the high school, its brick facade untouched by the tornado that had passed just north of it. Vehicles filled the parking lot, emergency services, Red Cross vans, cars belonging to volunteers and victims alike. The sheriff parked near the entrance. "Let me help you with your bag," he offered. Inside, the gymnasium had transformed into an organized chaos of cots, supplies, and people. Children played in one corner while parents filled out FEMA forms. Elderly couples huddled together on thin mattresses. Volunteers distributed food, clothing, and comfort. Maeve Dunaway spotted me immediately. She'd been checking an elderly man's blood pressure, but passed her equipment to another nurse and hurried over. "Thomasina, we were wondering where you'd gone this morning." Her eyes took in my wet clothing, the single bag, the absence of my son. Her expression told me she understood without being told. "Let's find you a cot. Are you hungry?" I wasn't, but I nodded anyway, following her through the maze of displaced humanity. She found me a spot against a wall, offering some privacy, and brought me a towel and a cup of hot tea. Small kindnesses that threatened to undo my composure more than Larissa's cruelty had. "Thank you," I said, my voice finally betraying a tremor. Maeve sat beside me on the cot. "I've known you 30 years, Toma. Never known you to ask for help even when you needed it most. When Franklin was sick, you insisted on caring for him yourself, until the very end." I sipped the tea, letting its warmth spread through me. "Different kind of storm, same result. You learn to weather it alone." "Except you're not alone," she said firmly. "Not unless you choose to be." That evening, I helped serve dinner to my fellow refugees, finding solace in being useful. Will Taggart was there too, his home also destroyed. He'd brought his weather equipment to the shelter and set up in a corner, monitoring conditions, providing updates to anyone who asked. The familiar routine of helping others provided a buffer against dwelling on Preston's betrayal. As night fell, I settled onto my cot, surrounded by the soft sounds of a gymnasium full of displaced people. Some wept quietly. Children whispered to parents. Volunteers spoke in hushed tones. I stared at the ceiling, exhaustion pulling at me, but sleep remaining elusive. My cell phone was gone, but my mind kept replaying the last photos I'd taken on it. June's school play, Franklin's grave with fresh flowers, the sunset viewed from my back porch. Images lost now, except in memory. I wondered if Preston would call the shelter looking for me, if he'd regretted his choice after I left. Beside me, an elderly woman wept softly into her pillow. Without thinking, I reached across the narrow aisle between our cots and took her hand. She gripped mine fiercely, her tears subsiding gradually. We didn't speak, didn't need to. In that moment, we were just two women who had lost their homes, finding comfort in the simple human connection of hand-holding. The next morning brought sunshine and the beginning of recovery efforts. Volunteers arrived with donuts and coffee. Representatives from insurance companies set up tables. FEMA officials distributed forms and information. The machinery of disaster response hummed around us, efficient if impersonal. I helped where I could, translating complex insurance language for elderly neighbors, entertaining children while their parents made calls, sorting donated clothing. Work kept my mind occupied, prevented it from dwelling on the fact that Preston hadn't called the shelter looking for me. Around noon, a commotion at the entrance drew attention. Juniper burst into the gymnasium, scanning the crowded space frantically. When she spotted me folding blankets, her face lit with relief. "Grandma!" she called, rushing over. "I've been looking everywhere for you." I embraced her, surprised by her presence. "How did you find me?" "I called like 20 places," she said. "Dad said you were staying with a friend, but I could tell something wasn't right." Why didn't you stay with us? We have plenty of room. The innocence of her question revealed that she didn't know what had transpired. I chose my words carefully. Your parents are very busy with their fundraiser. This arrangement is better for everyone. June's eyes narrowed with suspicion. At 16, she was perceptive enough to sense the evasion in my response. Mom said something, didn't she? What did she do? Nothing that needs discussing, I said firmly. What matters is that I'm safe and comfortable here. She looked around at the crowded gymnasium, the flimsy cots, the lack of privacy. Her expression made clear how little she believed me. This is ridiculous. You're coming home with me. June, I can't. Not to ask permission, she interrupted. I'm telling you, pack your stuff. The determined set of her jaw reminded me of Franklin. My late husband had the same expression whenever his mind was made up, a trait I once hoped Preston had inherited. Perhaps it had skipped a generation. Your parents aren't home, she finished. Dad's at work. Mom's at her spa day before the big event. I have our house to myself until dinner. She grabbed my duffel bag. You're coming with me, Grandma, at least to take a real shower and have a decent meal. I found myself unable to refuse her, partly from exhaustion, partly from the simple human desire for comfort after trauma. I informed Maeve I'd be gone for a few hours and followed my granddaughter out to the parking lot where the same teenage boy waited in an idling car. This is Jake, June said. He's my friend. The slight hesitation told me all I needed to know about the nature of their friendship, but I simply smiled and thanked him for the ride. During the drive to Preston's house, June chattered about school, her friends, how the tornado had disrupted plans for the spring dance. Normal teenage concerns that continued despite disaster. There was resilience in her normalcy. Preston's house looked even more imposing in the daylight. White columns framed the entrance, perfectly maintained landscaping lined the curved driveway. It was the kind of house featured in magazines. Beautiful, but sterile. Come on, June said, leading me through a side entrance. We'll go up the back stairs. You can use the guest bathroom to shower. I followed her through the immaculate kitchen, noticing caterers' supplies already being delivered for the weekend event. Upstairs, June showed me to a bathroom larger than my former bedroom, with a shower that required instructions to operate. I'll get you some clean clothes, she said. Mom keeps a closet of stuff she never wears. Alone in the marble-tiled bathroom, I caught my reflection in the oversized mirror. I looked older than my 67 years, face lined with fatigue, eyes hollowed by loss. The woman staring back at me seemed a stranger, vulnerable in a way I'd sworn never to be again after Franklin died. The hot water was a luxury after the shelter's lukewarm showers. I stood under the spray longer than necessary, letting it wash away the physical remnants of disaster, if not the emotional ones. June had left clothing on the counter. Designer jeans with the tags still attached, a cashmere sweater, underwear still in packaging. Larissa's cast-offs, items purchased and forgotten. Dressed in clothes that cost more than my monthly pension, I found June in the kitchen making sandwiches. She'd set the table for two, complete with cloth napkins and tall glasses of iced tea. You look nice, Grandma, she said, sliding a plate toward me. Eat. The food at the shelter is probably awful. It was, but I didn't confirm this. Instead, I savored the fresh bread, the crisp lettuce, the simple pleasure of a meal prepared with care. We ate in companionable silence until June finally asked the question I'd been dreading. What really happened yesterday? When you came here? I considered deflecting again, but found myself unwilling to lie to her. Your mother made it clear that my presence would be inconvenient given the upcoming fundraiser. June's face flushed with anger. That's why you're in that horrible shelter? Because of Mom's stupid party? It's not stupid to her, I said, surprising myself by defending Larissa. It's important to your parents' social standing, to your father's career. More important than family? June demanded. More important than you having a place to stay after losing everything? The righteousness of youth. So clear-cut, so uncomplicated by the compromises adults make. I reached across the table and patted her hand. Life is rarely simple, June. Your mother and I have never understood each other well. This situation just brought our differences to the surface. Dad went along with it, she said flatly. It wasn't a question. I didn't answer. Didn't need to. We both knew Preston's pattern of deferring to Larissa's wishes, of avoiding conflict at any cost. June pushed her plate away, appetite gone. "You should stay here," she declared. "I'll talk to Dad. He'll stand up to Mom this time. I know he will." The faith in her voice broke my heart a little. Some bridges once crossed can't be uncrossed, June. Your mother made her feelings clear. I won't impose where I'm not welcome. But a door slammed downstairs, followed by the click of heels on marble. Larissa's voice called out, "June? Whose car is that in the driveway?" June's eyes met mine, wide with unexpected fear. "She's home early." The footsteps grew louder, approaching the kitchen. I stood, gathering my dignity around me like armor. When Larissa appeared in the doorway, her shock at seeing me quickly morphed into fury. "What is she doing here?" she demanded, looking at June as if I were invisible. Before June could answer, I spoke. "I'm leaving now. June kindly offered me a shower and a meal, that's all." Larissa's gaze swept over me, noticing her own unworn clothes. "And my clothing? You helped yourself to that too?" June stepped between us. "I gave them to her, Mom. All her things were destroyed." "That's not your decision to make," Larissa snapped. Then, to me, "I thought I made myself clear yesterday. You're not welcome here." June gasped. "Mom." I gathered my duffel bag, now containing my dirty clothes. "Thank you for lunch, June. I should get back to the shelter." "You're not going back there," June insisted, turning to her mother. "She's staying here. Dad would want her to." Larissa's laugh was brittle. "Your father agrees with me completely. Why do you think he left for work so early today? He didn't want to deal with this situation." The confirmation of Preston's cowardice stung, even though I'd expected it. June looked between us, confusion and hurt playing across her young face. I couldn't bear to see her caught in this conflict. "It's all right," I told her gently. "The shelter is fine. There are good people there, people who understand what we're all going through." "It's not all right," June protested, tears forming. "None of this is all right." Larissa moved to block the doorway. "I want those clothes returned." "Mom!" June cried, horrified. I met my daughter-in-law's gaze steadily. "Of course. I'll change back." "No, you won't," June said firmly. "They're mine now. I'll buy you new ones, Mom." Larissa's face tightened with anger, but something in June's expression made her hesitate. Perhaps she realized she'd crossed a line her daughter couldn't forgive. After a tense moment, she stepped aside. "Fine. Keep them. But I want her gone before your father gets home." June started to argue, but I touched her arm. "It's okay. Thank you for lunch, sweetheart. I'll call you from the shelter's phone when I can." Tears spilled down June's cheeks. "This isn't fair." I hugged her, whispering, "Life rarely is. We endure anyway." As I walked past Larissa, she didn't meet my eyes. Her rigid posture betrayed the effort it took to maintain her composure. In that moment, I almost pitied her, so consumed by appearances that she'd sacrificed basic humanity. Outside, the sun shone mockingly bright in a clear blue sky. The same sky that had spawned destruction just days before now looked benign, innocent. I began the long walk back toward town, each step taking me further from the family that had rejected me and closer to an uncertain future I would somehow have to build from the wreckage of the old. The shelter smelled of disinfectant and too many bodies in too small a space. I'd returned just as dinner was being served, some kind of pasta casserole donated by a church group from a neighboring town. I sat alone, picking at my food, the taste of June's sandwich still lingering. The contrast between Preston's marble kitchen and this high school cafeteria couldn't have been starker. Sheriff Holloway spotted me and came over, settling his large frame onto the bench across from me. He didn't ask where I'd been or why I'd returned. Instead, he talked about recovery efforts, assessment teams, the estimated timeline for power restoration in various parts of town. Normal conversation in abnormal circumstances, a kindness I appreciated. "FEMA's set up a mobile office in the parking lot," he mentioned, stirring his coffee. "You should register if you haven't already. They can help with temporary housing." I nodded, though the thought of navigating government bureaucracy exhausted me. Franklin had always handled that sort of thing. In the 5 years since his death, I'd learned to manage on my own, but some tasks still felt overwhelming. "I'll go tomorrow," I promised. The sheriff hesitated, then added, "The Methodist Church is organizing home sharing for seniors displaced by the tornado. Matching people with spare rooms to those who need them. Might be more comfortable than this place." The suggestion was well-intentioned, but pride made me resistant. Sleeping in a stranger's home, accepting charity, it felt like another kind of failure. I'd already been rejected by my own family. The thought of risking further humiliation was unbearable. "I'll consider it," I said, knowing I wouldn't. Night fell, and with it came the collective restlessness of people sleeping away from home. Lights were dimmed in the gymnasium, but never fully extinguished. Volunteers moved quietly among the cots, checking on the elderly, soothing fretful children. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, June's distress playing on repeat in my mind. The sound of soft sobbing drew my attention to a young woman a few cots away. She couldn't have been more than 30, curled protectively around a sleeping toddler. I'd noticed her earlier. She kept to herself, spoke to no one except her child. Something about her isolation resonated with me. I rose quietly and approached, offering a tissue from the pocket of Larissa's expensive jeans. The young woman accepted it with a grateful nod. "Sorry," she whispered, dabbing at her eyes. "I'm trying not to wake Lily." "You're doing fine," I assured her, keeping my voice low. "It's harder at night, isn't it? When there's nothing to do but think." She nodded, her expression relaxing slightly at being understood. "I keep seeing it, the roof peeling away like paper." Lily's crib was right under the section that collapsed. If she hadn't been in the living room with me, words failed her. They weren't necessary. Every survivor in the gymnasium carried similar images. The what-ifs, the near misses, the moments where fate had pivoted on seemingly random choices. "I'm Thomasina," I said. "Most people call me Toma." "Melody," she replied. "And this is Lily." The sleeping child sighed in her sleep, eyelids fluttering. She clutched a raggedy stuffed rabbit missing one ear, the toy's worn condition suggesting it was a beloved companion. "Were you able to save much?" I asked. Melody shook her head. "Just what was in my car. Some clothes, Lily's favorite books, important papers." She touched the stuffed rabbit gently. This was in her hands when it happened. She hasn't let go since. I thought of Franklin's pocket watch, now tucked safely in my duffel bag. We all clung to something when everything else was torn away. "Do you have family you can stay with?" I asked, immediately regretting the question when her face closed off. "It's complicated," she said, in a tone that discouraged further inquiry. I recognized that tone. I'd used it myself when asked about Preston. Everything is, after a disaster. We sat in companionable silence until Melody's eyelids began to droop. I returned to my own cot, somehow comforted by the brief connection. In the darkness, surrounded by strangers united by common loss, I felt less alone than I had in my son's immaculate home. Morning arrived with the smell of coffee and donated donuts. Volunteers distributed toiletries, clean socks, information about various assistance programs. The gymnasium had taken on the atmosphere of a makeshift village, with distinct areas for different activities. A children's play zone in one corner, a medical station in another, tables for paperwork and consultations along one wall. I helped distribute breakfast, then joined the line for the FEMA mobile office. The process was tediously slow, each applicant spending 30 minutes or more with a representative. By noon, when my turn finally came, I was mentally exhausted from standing and waiting. The FEMA worker was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and efficient hands. She took my information, asked about insurance, entered data into her computer. The questions were personal, sometimes painfully so. No, I didn't have alternate housing arrangements. No, I couldn't stay with family. Yes, I lived alone. Yes, the house was a total loss. "We can provide rental assistance," she explained, printing forms for me to sign. "Hotels are full, but there are apartments available in Duncan, about 30 miles from here. We're arranging transportation for those who need it." 30 miles from Sulfur meant 30 miles from everything familiar. My friends, my church, what remained of my community. But sleeping on a cot in a gymnasium wasn't sustainable, especially at my age. My back was already protesting after just 2 nights. "When would this happen?" I asked. "Buses leave tomorrow morning. We're trying to place people as quickly as possible to free up the shelter for emergency workers coming in from other areas." I signed the forms, accepting the reality of my situation. Displacement upon displacement. First from my home, then from my town. Each move taking me further from the life I'd known. As I exited the FEMA trailer, I spotted a familiar figure near the parking lot. Zora Lambert, my oldest friend, was directing volunteers unloading supplies from a pickup truck. Last I'd heard, she was in Dallas with her daughter. "Zora!" I called, making my way toward her. She turned, her face lighting with recognition. We embraced, holding each other longer than usual. When we separated, I could see she'd been crying. "I thought you were in Dallas," I said. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Came back this morning. Couldn't stay away knowing what happened here." She gestured toward the supplies being unloaded. "My daughter's church sent all this. Food, clothing, toiletries." "Your bookstore?" I asked, knowing how much the small business meant to her. "Gone," she said simply. "Building still standing, but the roof caved in. Rain ruined most of the inventory." She shook her head, dismissing her own loss. "But your house was right in the path. Sheriff Holloway told me there's nothing left." I nodded, unable to find words adequate to describe the obliteration of 43 years of life. Zora squeezed my hand, understanding without explanation. "You're staying here?" she asked, looking toward the gymnasium. "For now. FEMA's arranging housing in Duncan starting tomorrow." Zora frowned. "Duncan? That's so far. What about Preston and that wife of his? Surely they have room." The question reopened the wound of rejection. I considered deflecting, offering the same vague explanation I'd given others. But this was Zora, who'd known me since we were schoolgirls, who'd stood beside me at Franklin's funeral, who'd never judged my failures as a mother, even when I judged myself. "They made it clear I wasn't welcome," I admitted. Zora's expression hardened. She'd never approved of how Preston distanced himself after marrying Larissa. "That boy needs his head examined. And that woman—" "It doesn't matter," I interrupted, not wanting to hear my own thoughts echoed back to me. "FEMA will help. I'll find a place until insurance comes through and I can rebuild." Zora studied me, her gaze penetrating the calm facade I'd constructed. "Stay with me," she said suddenly. "My house is gone too, but my daughter has a rental property in Maysville. It's small, just a one-bedroom, but we could share it. Better than being alone in Duncan." Maysville was closer than Duncan, only 15 miles from Sulfur. Still, the offer caught me off guard. Zora and I were friends, but we'd never lived together. Both of us were set in our ways, accustomed to our independence. "I couldn't impose," I began. She cut me off with a wave of her hand. "It's not imposing if I'm asking. Besides, 2 old women on fixed incomes can pool resources. Makes financial sense." There was practical wisdom in her suggestion. Sharing expenses would help stretch my savings during rebuilding. More importantly, I wouldn't be facing this new chapter alone. "Let me think about it," I said. Zora nodded, knowing better than to press. We spent the next hour sorting donations together, falling into an easy rhythm of cooperation. By the time she left for her daughter's house, I'd made my decision. Duncan might offer a fresh start, but Maysville offered friendship. At 67, the latter seemed infinitely more valuable. That evening, as I helped serve dinner at the shelter, Melody sought me out. She looked different, her hair neatly combed, wearing clean clothes, some color returned to her pale cheeks. Lily toddled beside her, clutching her mother's hand and the one-eared rabbit. "We're leaving tomorrow," Melody announced. "My sister's driving down from Oklahoma City to get us." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely pleased for her. Family support makes all the difference. A shadow crossed her face, quickly replaced by determination. "We weren't speaking before. The tornado. It changed things, made old arguments seem pointless. I thought of Preston, wondering if disaster might eventually bridge the gulf between us as well. It seemed unlikely. Unlike Melody's sister, my son hadn't reached out, hadn't checked whether I was safe or had shelter. The distance he maintained was deliberate, a choice renewed each day he didn't call. "I'm glad for you," I told Melody, meaning it despite the pang of envy. "Fresh starts are precious things." Lily tugged at my pant leg, offering me the rabbit to inspect. I crouched to her level, admiring the toy with appropriate seriousness. "What's your friend's name?" "Hoppy," she said shyly. "He got hurt." I nodded solemnly. "Hoppy is very brave, just like you." Melody watched our interaction with a soft smile. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for last night." Sometimes a kind word from a stranger means more than 1,000 from family. After they left, I found Sheriff Holloway to inform him I wouldn't be taking the FEMA bus to Duncan. He seemed relieved. Zora mentioned her plan, he admitted. Thought it made sense, but wasn't sure you'd agree. Small towns, I said, shaking my head. No such thing as a private decision. He chuckled. Comes with benefits, too. Support when you need it most. That night, sleep came easier, my decision made. The familiar discomforts of the shelter cot seemed temporary now, a brief stop on a journey rather than an indefinite sentence. In the morning, I'd call FEMA to decline their housing assistance. Then I'd begin the process of sorting through insurance paperwork, planning for eventual rebuilding. The sound of my name being called woke me from a deep sleep. I blinked in the dim light of the gymnasium, momentarily disoriented. A volunteer stood beside my cot, apologetic. Mrs. Beckett, there's someone asking for you at the front desk. I checked my watch, 11:30 p.m. Too late for casual visitors. Concern knotted in my stomach as I slipped on my shoes and followed the volunteer. June stood in the entrance area, her face streaked with tears. Jake hovered anxiously behind her, car keys in hand. When she saw me, she rushed forward, collapsing into my arms with a sob. What happened? I asked, holding her trembling form. Are your parents all right? She pulled back, wiping her face with her sleeve. They're fine. They're horrible, but they're fine. I led her to a bench near the wall, away from curious onlookers. Tell me what's wrong. The story spilled out in angry bursts. After I'd left, June had confronted her parents about their treatment of me. Larissa had defended her position, citing the importance of the fundraiser, the inconvenience of an unexpected houseguest, my supposed history of judging their lifestyle. Preston had tried to mediate, suggesting they could help me financially instead of offering shelter. And then Mom said, June's voice caught. She said you've always been dramatic, always played the victim. She said if you hadn't been so controlling when Dad was growing up, maybe he wouldn't have needed therapy. She looked at me, bewildered. Was Dad in therapy? He never told me that. The accusation was both familiar and surprising. Larissa had often implied I was an overbearing mother, but Preston in therapy was news to me. If my son had sought counseling, he'd never mentioned it. Another secret, another distance between us. Your father and I had our struggles after your grandfather died, I said carefully. Grief affects people differently, but I never knew about any therapy. June wiped at fresh tears. I told them they were being selfish and cruel. Dad just kept saying they'd send money to help, like that fixes everything. I said if they wouldn't take you in, I was coming to stay with you at the shelter. I could imagine Larissa's response to this ultimatum. I'm guessing that didn't go over well. Mom flipped out, said I was being manipulated by you. June's hands balled into fists. Dad told me I was too young to understand adult relationships. They forbade me to come here, took my car keys. I glanced at Jake, understanding now why he looked so uncomfortable. So you snuck out? June nodded defiantly. Jake drove me. I'm not going back tonight. I can't stand to be in that house with them. The situation was rapidly spiraling beyond my control. However justified June's anger, running away wasn't the answer. She was still a minor, still their daughter. My own conflicts with Larissa and Preston shouldn't become hers to bear. You can't stay here, June, I said gently. This isn't a solution. Why not? If you have to sleep on a cot in a gym, why shouldn't I? Maybe then they'd understand what they've done. The logic of teenage righteousness, direct, uncompromising, blind to nuance. I brushed hair from her forehead, remembering doing the same when she was small. Because you have a home, sweetheart. Whatever issues exist between your parents and me, they love you. If they can treat you this way, their love doesn't mean much, she said bitterly. That's not true. People can be wrong, can make poor choices and still love deeply. I held her gaze. Your parents are flawed, as all parents are. That doesn't erase their love for you. She looked away, unconvinced. I don't want to go back. Not tonight. I considered our options. Allowing her to stay at the shelter would only escalate the situation. Sending her home might drive a permanent wedge between us. A middle path seemed necessary. Let's call your parents, I suggested. Let them know you're safe. Then, if they agree, you can stay with Zora Lambert tonight. Her daughter lives just a few miles from here. June hesitated, then nodded grudgingly. I borrowed a phone from the front desk and dialed Preston's number, steeling myself for the conversation. He answered on the first ring, voice tight with worry. "June? Where are you?" "It's Mom, Preston," I said, using the familiar title despite everything. "June is with me at the shelter. She's safe." His relief quickly gave way to anger. "Put her on the phone. Now." "In a moment. She's upset, Preston. Forcing her to come home tonight will only make things worse. This is between us and our daughter," he said coldly. "You have no right to interfere." The accusation stung, but I kept my voice level. "I'm not interfering. I'm trying to help find a solution that works for everyone. June wants some space tonight. My friend Zora has offered her daughter's guest room. It would give everyone a chance to cool down." Silence stretched between us. I could almost see him weighing options, calculating which would cause least resistance from Larissa. Finally, he sighed. "One night. She comes home first thing tomorrow, and this ends any contact between you two for the foreseeable future." The condition was cruel, but unsurprising. Larissa would view June's rebellion as my influence, a threat to her control. Preston, as always, would choose the path of least resistance within his marriage. "That decision should be June's, not yours or mine," I replied. "She's 16, old enough to choose whether she wants a relationship with her grandmother." "She's our daughter," he snapped. "We decide what's best for her." I bit back a retort about his own judgment, aware that escalating the argument wouldn't help June. "We'll call Zora now. June will text you the address." I handed the phone to June, who spoke briefly to her father, her responses monosyllabic and cold. After hanging up, she leaned against me, suddenly looking exhausted. "I hate this," she whispered. "I know," I said, stroking her hair. "But sometimes the bravest thing we can do is give others time to find their way back to what matters." As Jake drove us to Zora's daughter's house, I watched the darkened landscape of Sulfur pass by. Debris still littered yards, blue tarps covered damaged roofs, some streets remained impassable. The physical recovery would take months. The emotional recovery, perhaps years. Beside me, June had fallen asleep, her head against my shoulder. In slumber, her face relaxed, showing the child she still partly was beneath the emerging adult. I thought of Preston at that age. Idealistic, sensitive, eager to please. Somewhere along the way, he'd lost those qualities, or buried them so deeply they no longer influenced his actions. I wondered if there was hope for reconciliation, if disaster might eventually bridge the gulf between us as it had for Melody and her sister. The thought provided small comfort as we drove through the wounded town, 3 displaced souls seeking temporary sanctuary in a world forever altered by wind and broken promises. Morning arrived with soft rain against windows, a gentle patter unlike the violent downpour that had followed the tornado. I'd spent the night on Zora's daughter's couch, unwilling to take the spare bedroom from June. Sleep had been elusive, my mind replaying Preston's cold ultimatum about ending contact with my granddaughter. June emerged from the guest room around 7, hair tousled from sleep, but eyes clear. The night's distance had tempered her anger, replacing it with quiet resolve. We shared a silent breakfast of toast and coffee, neither wanting to break the fragile peace with difficult conversations. Zora's daughter Rachel drove us back to the shelter, making small talk about rebuilding efforts and community response. June sat in the back seat, withdrawn, occasionally meeting my eyes in the rearview mirror. As we neared the high school, I spotted Preston's car in the parking lot. "He's already here," June muttered, tension returning to her shoulders. I squeezed her hand. "Remember what I said. Give him time." Preston stood by the gymnasium entrance, arms crossed, face set in lines of displeasure. He'd come alone, Larissa's absence a deliberate statement. When June exited the car, he stepped forward to embrace her. She allowed the contact, but didn't return it. "Thank you for bringing her," he said to Rachel, not acknowledging me. I remained by the car, understanding that any interaction between us would only make things harder for June. She glanced back as Preston led her toward his car, mouthing, "I love you," over her shoulder. I nodded, forcing a smile I didn't feel. Rachel waited until they drove away before speaking. "That man's your son. Hard to see the resemblance." The observation wasn't just about physical appearance. Preston had inherited Franklin's height and build, but little of my stubbornness or his father's integrity. I wondered when exactly he'd chosen comfort over character, convenience over compassion. He wasn't always like this, I said, more to myself than to her. That afternoon, Zora and I met with the landlord of her daughter's rental property in Maysville. The house was indeed small, a one-bedroom cottage originally built as vacation housing near the lake. The kitchen appliances were outdated, the bathroom needed renovation, but it was clean and structurally sound. Most importantly, it was available immediately. "It's not much," Zora apologized as we toured the cramped living room. "But it's better than the shelter." I ran my hand along a windowsill, noting how sunlight warmed the worn wooden floors. "It's perfect." We signed a 6-month lease, paying with emergency funds from FEMA. The landlord, understanding our situation, waived the security deposit. By evening, we'd moved our meager possessions from the shelter to the cottage: my single duffel bag, Zora's 2 suitcases, and donated household items from the relief center. That first night in Maysville marked a transition. The cottage felt temporary, but private in a way the shelter never could. Zora took the bedroom while I claimed the pull-out sofa. We established tentative routines around the single bathroom, the limited kitchen counter space. 2 independent women learning to coexist in compressed quarters. Days passed with gradual adjustment. We attended meetings with insurance adjusters, filled out endless paperwork, made phone calls to utility companies and contractors. The ordinary business of rebuilding lives consumed our waking hours, leaving little energy for dwelling on emotional wounds. June called from a friend's phone 3 days after returning home. Her parents had taken her cell phone as punishment for running away, but they couldn't monitor her completely. Our conversations were necessarily brief, snatched moments of connection during her lunch period or after school. "Mom and Dad are barely speaking," she reported during one call. "Dad sleeps in the guest room now." I felt a pang of guilt, knowing my presence in their lives, even at a distance, had created this tension. "I'm sorry, June. That must be difficult for you." "Don't apologize. It's not your fault. They're awful." Her voice dropped. "Mom's fundraiser was a disaster. Half the guests canceled at the last minute. Because of the tornado? Because of gossip. Someone at school told my friend Mackenzie that her mom overheard Sheriff Holloway talking about how they turned you away. Word spread fast. Small towns had long memories and clear moral codes. Refusing shelter to family after a natural disaster violated those codes. Preston and Larissa, so concerned with social standing, now faced its judgment. I felt no satisfaction in this development, only sadness that their choices had led to such consequences. A week after moving to Maysville, I returned to Sulfur to view what remained of my property. Sheriff Holloway had offered to accompany me, but this was a journey I needed to make alone. Zora drove me to the edge of my neighborhood, promising to return in 2 hours. The destruction was more complete than I'd imagined. Where my 2-story craftsman once stood, only the concrete foundation remained, surrounded by scattered debris. The massive oak tree that had shaded our patio lay uprooted, its branches stripped bare. My garden was unrecognizable, buried under insulation and splintered lumber. I picked my way carefully through the rubble, occasionally recognizing fragments of my former life: a broken picture frame, the metal head of Franklin's garden rake, a single ceramic mug from our wedding set. Each item triggered memories, moments from a past now physically erased. At the far corner of the property, I noticed something unexpected: fresh flowers placed carefully on a cleared patch of ground, red tulips wrapped in green paper, my favorites. Only one person knew that preference. June must have come here, her own private pilgrimage to what was lost. The realization broke something inside me. I sank to my knees among the debris, finally allowing myself to weep, not just for the house, but for everything. For Franklin's absence when I needed his steady strength, for Preston's betrayal and Larissa's cruelty, for the distance growing between me and the granddaughter I adored, for the community fractured by wind and trauma. I don't know how long I knelt there, soil staining Larissa's expensive jeans, tears falling onto broken remnants of my life. Eventually, the storm of emotion passed, leaving behind an unexpected clarity. The house was gone. My relationship with Preston lay in ruins, but I was still here, still standing, still capable of rebuilding, not just walls and a roof, but a life worth living. As I rose, brushing dirt from my clothes, a familiar truck pulled alongside the property. Will Taggart stepped out, his weather-beaten face registering surprise at seeing me. "Thomasina," he called, approaching carefully through the debris. "Didn't expect to find anyone here today." I wiped my face, embarrassed to be caught in such a vulnerable moment. "Just saying goodbye, I suppose?" He nodded, understanding without explanation. "Been doing the same myself. My place is 3 blocks over." He gestured vaguely eastward. Nothing left but memories. We stood in companionable silence, surveying the devastation from different perspectives, but with shared experience. Will had lived in Sulfur even longer than I had. His wife had passed 2 years before Franklin, leaving him alone in the house they'd built together in the 1970s. "Heard you're staying in Maysville with Zora Lambert," he said finally. News traveled fast in small communities. "Temporarily, until insurance comes through and rebuilding starts." "Same here. Found a room to rent from a former colleague in Davis." He hesitated, then added, "Some of us meet at the diner there on Thursday mornings. 8 o'clock, nothing formal, just coffee and conversation. You and Zora would be welcome." The invitation caught me off guard. Will and I had been neighbors for decades, but our interactions had always been casual. Friendly waves, occasional chats about weather or gardening. This felt like something more, a deliberate extension of community beyond geographical boundaries. "I'd like that," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. 2 weeks after the tornado, June appeared at the Maysville cottage, unannounced. Zora was at a doctor's appointment in Ardmore, leaving me alone when the unfamiliar car pulled into our tiny driveway. My heart lurched when I recognized my granddaughter in the passenger seat. Jake helped carry several bags to the door before departing with a promise to return in 2 hours. June stood awkwardly in the cramped living room, taking in the modest surroundings. "It's small," she said, "but nice. It suits us for now." I gestured to the bags. "What's all this?" "Your things. Well, some of them." She began unpacking, photo albums carefully salvaged from my ruined house, Franklin's fishing tackle box somehow intact, the quilt my grandmother had made for my wedding. "Sheriff Holloway's team has been finding stuff. They're storing it at the courthouse for people to claim. I've been checking every few days." The thought of her quietly collecting these pieces of my life, preserving what could be saved, filled me with gratitude, too deep for words. I touched the quilt, fingers tracing familiar patterns now stained with mud, but still recognizable. "How did you get away to come here?" I asked, remembering Preston's ultimatum. June's expression turned defiant. "Told them I was studying at the library. Dad's too busy with damage control at work to check. The fundraiser mess cost him a promotion. I should have discouraged the deception, emphasized honesty even in difficult circumstances. Instead, I helped her unpack, listening as she shared news from Sulfur, which businesses had reopened, how the school was functioning with part of its roof missing, which families had decided to move away rather than rebuild. "Dad's been acting weird," she confided as we sorted through photos. "He asked about you yesterday, whether I thought you were okay." The information stirred complicated emotions, hope, wariness, lingering hurt. "What did you tell him?" "The truth, that you're making the best of things despite how they treated you." She hesitated, then added, "I think he feels guilty. Not enough to actually do anything about it, but still." Guilt without action was meaningless, yet I found myself clinging to this small indication that Preston might be reconsidering his choices. Perhaps the distance between us wasn't permanent. Perhaps bridges could be rebuilt alongside houses. As Jake's promised return time approached, June grew anxious, checking her watch repeatedly. The fear of discovery clouded our final minutes together. I helped her gather her things, walking her to the driveway to wait. "I'll try to come back next week," she promised, embracing me tightly. I held her at arm's length, studying her young face. "Be careful, June. I don't want to come between you and your parents." She looked away. "They've done that themselves." After she left, I stood in the cottage doorway, watching the road long after her car had disappeared. The brief visit had been both healing and painful, a reminder of what I'd lost and what remained precious. Like the tornado itself, some forces couldn't be controlled, only weathered with whatever strength we could muster. That evening, when Zora returned, I shared the news of June's visit, showing her the salvaged items now arranged carefully around our temporary home. As we prepared a simple dinner in the tiny kitchen, I found myself smiling despite everything. A genuine smile, not the practiced one I'd worn at the shelter. "You look different," Zora observed, setting plates on our folding table. "Do I?" She nodded, like someone who's decided to weather the storm instead of just enduring it. The distinction seemed important, though I couldn't articulate exactly why. Endurance was passive, a matter of survival. Weathering suggested something more active, more intentional, facing the wind rather than merely bending before it. Outside, rain began falling again, a steady rhythm against the cottage roof. Not the destructive force that had accompanied the tornado, but the nurturing kind that encouraged new growth. I thought of my ruined garden in Sulfur, wondering if wildflowers might already be pushing through the debris, reclaiming what wind had scattered. 1 month after the Sulfur Scar tore through our town, I stood on the empty foundation of my former home, reviewing blueprints with a contractor. The insurance settlement had finally come through, not enough to replicate what was lost, but sufficient to build something new. Something smaller, more practical for a woman in her late 60s, but still mine. "We could start next week," the contractor said, a local man who'd known Franklin. "If you're sure about the plans." I nodded, watching clouds drift across the Oklahoma sky. The same sky that had spawned destruction now looked benign, innocuous. Weather in Oklahoma, always changing, always unpredictable. Like family relationships, I supposed. June had visited the cottage in Maysville 3 more times, each visit carefully planned around her parents' schedules and Jake's availability to drive. During her last visit, she'd mentioned something that kept replaying in my mind. "Dad went to the shelter last week," she'd said while helping me fold laundry. "He was asking about you, where you'd gone, how you were doing." The news stirred complicated feelings: hope, wariness, lingering hurt. Why would Preston seek information about me instead of calling directly? Was it guilt, concern, or something else entirely? I'd pushed the questions aside, unwilling to build expectations on such fragile foundation. 3 days after meeting the contractor, I received an unexpected call at the cottage. Sheriff Holloway's voice sounded oddly formal when I answered. "Mrs. Beckett, I hope I'm not disturbing you. There's been a situation involving your son." My heart stuttered. "Preston? Is he hurt?" "No, ma'am, nothing like that. There's been an incident at his home. I think it would be best if you came to Sulfur." The vague explanation left room for imagination to spiral, but Holloway refused to elaborate further. Zora drove me to the sheriff's office, her usual chatter replaced by concerned silence. Whatever had happened, the gravity in Holloway's voice suggested it wasn't trivial. The sheriff's office bustled with activity when we arrived. Holloway met us in the lobby, leading me to a private conference room where, to my shock, Preston waited. He looked haggard, eyes bloodshot, clothes rumpled as if he'd slept in them. When he saw me, he stood, uncertainty written across his face. Holloway discreetly excused himself, leaving us alone in uncomfortable silence. Preston spoke first, voice hoarse. "Mom, thank you for coming." The formality between us felt strange, considering the circumstances. "Sheriff Holloway said there was a situation. Are you all right? Is June safe?" "June's fine. She's staying with a friend." He ran a hand through disheveled hair. "Larissa's been arrested. She attacked me with a kitchen knife during an argument." The information landed like a physical blow. Whatever I'd expected, it wasn't this. "My God, Preston, are you hurt?" "Just a cut on my arm. Nothing serious." He pulled back his sleeve, revealing a bandaged forearm. "It's Larissa I'm worried about. She's not well, hasn't been for months. The tornado, the fundraiser disaster, June's rebellion, it all became too much." I struggled to process this revelation. Larissa had always seemed so controlled, so polished. The image of her wielding a knife against my son didn't align with the woman I thought I knew. "What can I do?" I asked, falling back on practical matters when emotions became overwhelming. Preston's composure cracked. "I don't know how to handle this alone. June won't even speak to me right now. The house feels like a mausoleum. I keep thinking about what you said, about weathering storms together." The reference to our last conversation before the tornado struck me forcefully. He'd remembered my words. even as he'd rejected their meaning in practice. "Preston, I know I have no right to ask for help," he interrupted. "Not after how I treated you. But I don't know who else to turn to." The request wasn't explicit, but the implication was clear. He needed support navigating this crisis, practical help, emotional steadiness. The qualities he'd dismissed when seeking shelter for myself, he now sought for himself. Part of me, the wounded part still raw from rejection, wanted to refuse, to remind him of his coldness, Larissa's cruelty, the ultimatum about June, to ask why he thought he deserved compassion when he'd offered none. But another part recognized the opportunity beneath the request. Not just reconciliation, but reclamation of the relationship we'd once shared. "I'll help however I can," I said simply. Relief washed across his face, followed by something that looked suspiciously like shame. "I don't deserve it." "No," I agreed, "but that's what family does. We show up, especially when it's hard." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Preston moved into the cottage temporarily while Larissa underwent psychiatric evaluation and treatment. The arrangement strained the already limited space, but Zora adapted with characteristic flexibility, treating my son with cautious kindness. June, initially resistant to contact with her father, gradually began calling, brief conversations that grew longer with each passing week. Rebuilding commenced, both my house and our fractured relationships. Preston spent weekends in Sulfur, overseeing construction alongside me. We worked in silence initially, the gulf between us too wide for casual conversation. Gradually, words returned, tentative at first, then more freely. Not about Larissa or the knife incident, but about safe topics, the weather, construction progress, June's college aspirations. 2 months after the tornado, as framers completed the basic structure of my new home, Preston finally addressed what we'd both been avoiding. "I failed you," he said quietly as we surveyed the skeleton of what would become my living room. "When you needed me most, I chose convenience over compassion. There's no excuse for that." I studied the bare beams above us, considering his words. "Why did you do it?" He sighed heavily. "Fear mostly. Fear of disrupting the life I'd built. Fear of Larissa's disapproval. Fear of admitting our family wasn't what I pretended it was." He gestured at the partially constructed walls around us. Ironic that it took everything falling apart to make me see what actually matters. The apology was overdue but sincere. I accepted it with the same simplicity I'd offered help. Not because he deserved immediate forgiveness, but because harboring resentment would only further damage what we were trying to rebuild. Larissa remained in treatment, her absence creating space for uncomfortable truths to emerge. Preston revealed years of controlling behavior, emotional manipulation, isolation from friends and family, patterns I'd glimpsed but never fully understood. June, allowed more freedom with her mother away, flourished with renewed connection to both her father and me. By midsummer, 3 months after the tornado, my new house was nearly complete. Smaller than the original, but thoughtfully designed for my needs. 1 story with wider doorways, anticipating possible mobility issues in future years. A covered porch wrapping around 2 sides, offering views of the garden I'd begun replanting. A spare bedroom with its own bathroom, ready for June's visits. The day before moving in, I stood on that porch with Preston and June, surveying what we'd accomplished. Not just the physical structure, but the reconstructed bonds between us. They remained fragile in places, still showing cracks where trust had fractured, but stronger than I dared hope in those early days at the shelter. "It's beautiful, Mom," Preston said, using the familial term that had been absent during our estrangement. "Better than before." June slipped her arm through mine, leaning against my shoulder in the comfortable way of teenagers who haven't quite outgrown physical affection. "Tornado-proof," the contractor said. "Extra reinforcement in all the right places." I smiled at her optimism, her belief that we could build structures impervious to nature's fury. Some lessons come only with age. The knowledge that nothing is truly tornado-proof in Oklahoma, that safety is always relative, never absolute. But some houses, like some relationships, can be rebuilt stronger after devastation, incorporating lessons learned from what was lost. Will Taggart joined us later, bringing a housewarming gift of wind chimes crafted from debris collected around town. Music from the storm, he called it, hanging them from the porch beam. The soft tones they produced held no hint of the destruction that had yielded their materials, transformed now into something beautiful. As sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, I sat on my new porch surrounded by the people who had helped me weather the Sulfur Scar. Not just the physical tornado, but the emotional tempest that followed. Zora with her practical wisdom, Will with his quiet solidarity, June with her fierce loyalty. Even Preston, despite his failings, had ultimately found his way back to the values I'd tried to instill. The wind chimes sang softly in the evening breeze, a reminder that even devastating forces can, in time, produce unexpected harmony. I'd lost a house, but reclaimed a family. Not perfect, still learning, but present when it mattered most. In Oklahoma, we understand that storms return, seasons after season. The only choice is how we rebuild, what foundations we lay, and who stands beside us when the sky darkens again. If you've been through your own family tornado, please subscribe to my channel for more stories about weathering life's storms. Leave a comment below, sharing how you rebuilt after everything fell apart. I read every single one and draw strength from your experiences.